actually, when I was very young, I was 23, like almost 40 years ago, my editor asked me to cover some acts of violence, like domestic issues, the domestic violence issues down south of Cancun, in the southeast of Mexico. And I went there to talk to the Mayan women, and they didn't want to talk about that specifically. They wanted to talk about child abuse. And they started talking about how, as Cancun was becoming a hub for tourists that were looking for children or for young women, they started exploiting children. So it caught my attention, and it was not me that had decided to investigate that. I didn't even know that was happening there, but I understood that this kind of massive tourism created by the economic powers of Mexico and the US was just bringing wonderful people, of course, but the dark side of it was that a lot of these pedophiles that came from the US and from other countries, and also from Mexico, were looking for children in south of Mexico. So I asked myself if this was a pattern, if this was happening in other places, in other countries, in my own country. And then in 1994, I went to Ciudad Juarez. It was only four of us, four journalists. And I started investigating the femicide, the killing of very young women in the maquiladora system in northern Mexico. And once I started, I got into that, I started getting all these death threats with my friends, and the police didn't want to talk to us. Nobody wanted to talk about that. They were blaming the victims, and I understood there was something else there. So I was one of the first investigative reporters that really covered the history and the networks, criminal networks that were killing these young women in Ciudad Juarez. And then from then on, I specialized and I studied criminology to try to understand the psyche of this kind of criminal behavior. And then I kept going and investigating all the issues until 2003, that I met some victims of a child pornography network. Of apparently was only a lonely pedophile, a millionaire Lebanese Mexican guy that was living in Cancun in a very fancy hotel. He was the owner of this hotel, and I met this young girl. She had been abused since she was 13 years old. And then once I started investigating more and more and more, they immediately threatened my life. They sent someone with a gun. They asked me to stop investigating. And I had a TV show back then, and locally in Cancun, and I just kept going. And I said, you cannot stop me. So I kept publishing even the death threats. And then I met all these children, and then we ended up with my team rescuing almost 200 kids. And most of them had been abused since they were 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I decided to go into the deep web. Back then in 2003, most people didn't even know what the deep web was. So I got in touch with a hacker, a very young guy, and he taught me how to do it. So I started getting all this evidence that I later used in court to demonstrate what these guys were doing. They were buying and selling children from Mexico, from Florida, and from other countries in Latin America, like Paraguay and El Salvador, and they were selling them to this businessman for $3,000. So I have this phone calls recorded of these two guys that were discussing the price of one girl that they were bringing from Florida, helped by the mafias of pedophiles in Florida, obviously. And then I published a book, and well, it was really interesting because on one hand, a lot of people understood what was going on, thanks to my work and the work of other colleagues that started covering the issue. And I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed. And you understand this because you've been there investigating and you know, watching things unravel. I thought this is so important. I need Mexican people or my readers to understand this is not a small group of guys that are doing sex trafficking, human trafficking with little children, and especially little girls. This is an enormous network of people that are doing this around the world, and they are also laundering money, and they are doing political favors to each other and to other powerful people. So they create this network of protection, political protection, and judicial protection. So I kept going, and then they kidnapped me. The police kidnapped me and put me in jail and tortured me for 24 hours, tried to get me to confess that my book was full of lies, and I didn't. And then they put them in jail.
What the book you're talking about, was that Demons of Eden?
Yes, Demons of Eden. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick that book up. I'm really excited to look deeper into that book. And so that Demons of Eden was based on what you found in what started from the Cancun trip?
Exactly. Yes. When we, back then in 2000, in the year 2000, I decided to open a shelter, a high security shelter in Cancun. As an activist, I'm a journalist, but I'm also an activist. As an activist, I knew how the justice system did not work properly in Mexico, as we know. So with a group of friends, we decided to open a shelter. And I went to the US and I did some training on how to operate a high security shelter. And I had the shelter, and that's where we protected all these children and their mothers. And then we started discovering more and more victims from all over, not only Mexico, but from Latin America and the US, of course. So yes, that's a book that opened the door to these kind of investigations on human trafficking, child pornography production, and the links with these guys and politicians and some members of the justice system, not only in Mexico, but in other countries.
There were some dark moments. Holy shit.
We ought to probably have dinner sometime.
They were ghosts.
Okay, this guy's serious.
I mean, that's unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of children digging cobalt out of the ground.
You just sensed that it was out
It's
there.
like they'd been hit by a nuclear bomb.
We're not framing history correctly.
I want adaptability and versatility.
Don't draft Wolf on your fantasy team. He's not going to get the ball this year.
This is going to matter one day.
This is how I pulled myself out.
That's when my eyes were opened.
This is a whole new wildlife enemy, man. This is crazy. Who are these guys?
Us in our own country don't even have the same gratitude towards it.
And he does the right thing because he closes the distance.
We're all programmed in this world to push ourselves even farther.
I don't have to make something important, but what I have to try to do is make something you'll never forget.
And you said that because of this book, the law enforcement in that time arrested you and tried to get you to admit that the stories were false, and they tortured you. When you say tortured you, can you speak on how they tortured you?
Sure, of course. When I published the book, I had many death threats, and I published it with Random House, which is a big publishing house, and the national chief of police in Mexico, Miguel Angel Yunes, was one of the members that I mentioned in my book, and I had the evidence. So he called the director, the publisher from Random House, to his office in Mexico City and told him not to publish my book, that he kind of threatened him, and he was really scared. He came back to the office and he said, Lydia, are you sure you're going to include these names? And I said, yes, I have the evidence and we have to do it. This must be done. It's the only way. So we published the book, and then I kept getting threats until, well, I'm going to stop here and go back because in the book, what I did was I published the names of all the governors, 4 governors, senators, the Minister of Interior of Mexico, that were all linked, and not only with the network of pedophiles and sex traffickers and abusers, but also in the network of money laundering. So I published all their names, and one of these governors, the governor of Puebla, a city next to Mexico City, he was very powerful. He was in the PRI party, one of the main parties, the political party that governed Mexico for 70 years. And he was sure he was going to become the president of Mexico. So when I published his name and when I started talking about him and the other guys that were funding his campaigns and everything, he got really angry at me, and he decided to protect the criminals. And then he sent some corrupted policemen. They got to my office in Cancun. I used to have 4 bodyguards from the government and an armored car. And the bodyguards were like 10 feet away from me. And then all these policemen came towards me, and then they asked me not to move. They put a gun on my arm, and they said, don't move or we will kill them all. So I didn't move, and they took me away, and they put me in a car and drove me all the way from Cancun. These 2 cars filled with policemen. They drove me from Cancun to Puebla by car, obviously, and all the way they stopped in many places, and they tortured me. Physically, psychologically, of course. They wanted to break me down, and sexually. And then once I arrived in Puebla with them, all the media knew what was going on. My back then husband was a journalist, so he kept calling everyone, and everyone knew that I was kidnapped by the police. We didn't know it was a governor who gave the orders. But once I was in the car and they started telling me the names of all these guys, I knew it was these guys. You know, I knew the government was involved. And then once I got into Puebla, I thought they cannot put me in jail because this is ridiculous. All the evidence is there. I didn't commit a crime. They are the criminals, but they did put me in jail. And the judge that was paid off with a trip to Las Vegas. She is a woman who I'm still trying to take to the courts. She sentenced me immediately to 7 years in jail for defamation of the criminals. So I was able to get out of jail and then to go to jail every day to sign as a criminal. And then I placed a case against them. And then eventually 1 year after, I won the case. And then I started getting everyone in jail, including my torturers. And now the governor is in jail. So they tried to kill me like 4 years ago again, because he's in jail. Because the Interpol got the main leaders, the ex-governor of Puebla, and Kamel Nassif, one of the leaders. There is a multi-millionaire guy who lives between Lebanon, London, the US, and Nevada, and Mexico.
Oh my goodness. For the average person would run. They would not put themselves in harm's way. But your dedication to journalism and the truth is inspiring. So thank you for telling me that. And for those who are listening and watching who probably don't know, would you, and I know you tell your story often, and I know it's not easy, so if you wouldn't mind giving our audience, just from the beginning, when you initially heard the call and exactly what happened.
So on November 4th of 2019, I'm going to tell you the story of what happened before I tell you where I was, because it is such a convoluted story. It's kind of hard to get the story right, because there were multiple people, multiple vehicles. So 2 cartels had a shootout the night before in a town called Agua Prieta. That's a border town down in Mexico. All this we know now. Obviously, we didn't know at the time. At the time, we had no idea what happened and what was going on. And they were told, these 2 rival cartels, their orders were to calentar plaza, is the way it's said in Spanish, right? Which means to heat up the scenario because it brings kind of police and government pressure on the opposing cartel, right? If you kind of heat up their territory a little bit. And so their orders were do whatever it took, you know, make sure that that situation, that area that they were fighting over had a maximum impact or whatever, right? So they were having shootouts, but a lot of misunderstanding is this idea that my sister was somehow caught in the middle of a shootout. They were massacred a mile from their home. They were leaving, it was 10:30 in the morning when I got the news, so this wasn't in the middle of the night, and it wasn't as remote of a place as you think. Yes, it is a remote road in Mexico, but it's their remote road in Mexico. You know what I mean? It's this is a passage that they go daily. People from those towns drive those roads. Like that's how they get to the nearest grocery store. You know, they live on this kind of like a homestead, a Mormon homestead in Sonora. I'm not from La Mora, where the massacre took place. I'm from another Mormon colony that's in the neighboring state, Chihuahua. It's like 3.5 hours from there. So I had never actually been to that area. But it's you know, they've got 50 homes there. It's not small, you know, and then they have another town right there, you know, they're neighbors, you know, so it's not so remote. So the leading up to the events, there had been like a couple, the violence had seemed to be escalating between the cartels with 6 months, let's call it, to a year. So they'd had a little bit more interactions where they've been stopped by cartels and things like that. And I know this sounds like, how did anybody leave their house? Wasn't it instantly martial law? Well, that's kind of the way things are in Mexico now. So being stopped by military or cartel with big guns or things like that is what's happening in Mexico. So it wasn't the most insane thing, even though it seems like it now in hindsight. But the violence had been escalating. So because of that, these 3 women that all had different places they needed to be decided to kind of drive out together, you know, to kind of caravan, so to speak, through this mountain pass that you kind of lose service at the top of it before you get down into the bigger town. My sister's vehicle had broken down. So one of the other women that had been murdered, drove her back, but didn't want to wait for her. And the other woman took off ahead, was like, I'm not waiting for you guys, not worth it. It's like, you know, this is their own, they've been on this road 1,000 times. They weren't that stressed, a little bit, but not that stressed. So my sister borrows her mother-in-law's vehicle, doesn't wait, tells her brother-in-law, you need to go get my car, it's broken down, doesn't wait for him. She leaves in her mother-in-law's vehicle, unloads all her stuff, her kids. She had her, my 12-year-old nephew, my 10-year-old niece, and her twins with her. So imagine she's got all this luggage, she's unloading in the middle of this like road that she broke down on and took off. So when her brother-in-law shows up to pick up this broken down vehicle to see what happened to the wheel, right? He's kind of working on the tire, and all of a sudden he looks up and he sees like black smoke, like black smoke, and he thinks that's so weird. Like, is someone's car on fire? You know, what's going on up there? And so he drives up almost to offer help to whoever's having, you know, issues with the vehicle up there. And when he pulls up to the site, like I said, it's about a mile from their like houses and hometown. He recognizes his mother's vehicle, and it's all shot up and it's on fire. And at this point, the blaze is so big that he can't even get close enough to see if they are inside or not. Like the fire's too strong. He sees men dressed in military fatigues, you know, like military style, running down the side of the mountain, and kind of gets scared, doesn't know what's going on, and goes back home for help. So when they all gather together, you know, a bunch of men to go see what's happening, what happened to the vehicle. By the time they get back up there, they'd even sent drones up there. I mean, at this point, they're afraid. Like, you're in Mexico, you are the first responders, but they're afraid. They don't know what's going on. So they had drones go up there. They see the vehicle on fire. They don't see anybody around it. So they drive up, and I don't know if you watched the video of Kenny Miller where he says, you know, it's on YouTube and stuff, you know, this is for the record. Anita and 4 of my grandchildren have been burnt. And that's when we got the news that their bodies, that they had been in the vehicle, and that they had been shot up and burned. So at this point, they don't know, nobody knows what has happened to the other two women and their children. I got the news at 10:30. The entire country got the news around 10:30. Like, everybody knew what was happening. I was on Victoria Island up in Canada on an anniversary trip. And at first, when I got the news, I thought the vehicle shot up. This first thing that came through, you WhatsApps, like everybody has a family WhatsApp. So the second someone posts something, it just spreads like fire. So the first news that I received was something had happened to Nita. The vehicle had been shot up. That's it. So in my mind, I'm like praying, like with God, that, that they're okay, that they're probably been kidnapped at this point. I'm thinking of my sister, and I'm thinking of poor little Crystal, and I'm thinking like rape, and those are the things that are going through my mind, like that they've been kidnapped.
things that we've heard to be common practice, kind of in that. Yeah.
So at that point, that's what I'm thinking. And we're trying to get back, because you kind of have to take seaplanes off of Victoria. And there had been fog that morning that it held us back. So we're trying to figure out, we're kind of just in shock and walking back to see if we can get off the island. And my husband, Dustin, just walked like, I don't know, 10 feet further in front of me. Like, I don't know, he must have had a feeling, and he's listening to the WhatsApps that are coming through. And he just turns around and he tells me, babe, they're all gone. They're all burned. They're just all gone. And I just fell to the ground. I was sobbing. I just was so like, it just seems so impossible, right? Just still seems so impossible, this story. Like, I feel like I'm living in a different time, in a different world. As things progress, like I said, at this point, you're in so much shock, you don't quite, know what to do. So I was just kind of sitting there in my own thoughts, but Dustin was following what was actually taking place in La Mora, and he sat down and he said, your parents are going up there. He said the police haven't showed up. It's been hours, nobody has shown up, and nobody knows what happened to the other two women, and they're up in the mountain, and nobody will show up and help. And so your family, I think you need to call your dad and tell him not to go. I'm worried about your parents. So I called my dad and I said, Dad, I don't want you to go. I'm so scared. And he said, Mija, I'm going to get my daughter. If you want to pray for me, pray for me. Talk to your mom. And I talked to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm just so worried. And she's like, sweetheart, no one's coming to save us. It's just us. We're going to help, and we're going to go find those other moms, and we're going to go see what's happening. And my parents were about 3.5 hours from La Mora. They weren't right next door. So them and a whole group of like, my mom was the only female, but a group of like probably, I'm going to say 30 men. I don't know how many took off from my hometown to go offer aid, right? Assistance to see what was happening. They were stopped at multiple military stops along the way, which we now believe was on purpose to give the cartel a chance to get away. When they're arriving, when they get to that first town before you head up to the mountain pass, they actually meet up with Donna's husband, David. Donna was one of the other women that was murdered that day, along with her 2 boys. She had 9 children in her vehicle, and 7 survived, and the other 2 were murdered.
Could you clarify for me? So several vehicles were shot up in the same.
Yeah. So at this point, we don't know that yet of the story. We're just, at this point, Nita was no. So we still don't know what had happened to those other 2 women. But at the end, both women were murdered, and 2 more children were murdered, and the other survivors were shot up.
And was this separate locations or one location?
Separate location. So that's what people get confused, because Christina had taken off up the mountain pass. We now believe she was actually murdered first, and she was in her vehicle with her baby Faith in a car seat, just 2. She actually got out of the vehicle as a woman, put her arms up, and they shot her anyways. When Donna's ahead of Nita, right? Because she dropped her off, and she was ahead of my sister Nita. When she gets up to the place, but it's more like 5 miles, I think, away. So she was miles ahead of me now up in that mountain pass a little more. So when she arrives, they actually see Christina's body on the ground and started trying to reverse. And that's when the whole vehicle just gets shot up. And 2 boys and Donna were murdered. I think 1 or 2 of the kids actually were not injured. And then the other ones were all shot up from gunshot wounds to their chest, their whole faces were shot up, arms, legs. And they actually were left up in that mountain with no government showing up. When my mom, I believe it was about 8 o'clock at night, when my mom, that caravan coming from my hometown that had met up with Donna's husband, David, that was coming down from the Phoenix, Tucson area, showed up. And that's when they actually first found out that baby Faith had survived, because nobody even knew she was alive in the other vehicle. She had 2 bullets in her car seat. And those children, at first they tried to walk home all together, but they were all so shot up that they ended up having Devin, who was 14, I believe at the time, walk home. And he said he at points was being shot at. It took him all day to get back to the town to tell them that his mom and Christina were dead, that the 2 boys were dead, and that his siblings were hiding up in the mountains, shot up.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, it's awful. It's stories.
And those kids, I couldn't imagine.
Testimony, I mean, they said that when they were trying to walk, right? They was like, well, how did you do that? And they said, well, we had my little brother on a pillow, kind of holding his face up. And we would walk, and then like 20 feet, and we'd set him down on the road, and then we'd go back for the other baby that was shot up. And then we'd walk 40 feet, and then we'd walk back. And imagine they have to set these kids down, and they're also all shot up. Like, their survival story is insane, honestly. And the first thing every one of them said was, we have to go back. We have to go back for the others, you know? It's just, so Devin says that they just knew they weren't getting anywhere, right? So they decided to kind of hide out and let just one of them go, because it was just taking too long. And they were afraid too. I mean, all these cartels all around them, gunshots all around them. And so when they ended up, Devin ended up taking so long that they ended up sending the 9-year-old who was shot in her arm, and she ended up getting lost. And they didn't find her. She was the last one to be found, because she had taken like the wrong little road trying to find a way home. But we're talking 9:30 at night, this little 9-year-old out there trying to get home.
Did she pass away?
No, she survived. She's a survivor. First thing she said, it's pitch black outside. I don't think 9:30, 10 o'clock by then. And they said that she had taken the lights. It was cute. Her dad was the one when he was on the scene. And so my mom was sitting next to her dad, and she said, so first they come across this scene, and it's the first time, like, so at this moment they had gotten a call that they were dead because Devin had made his way home. So they didn't know they were showing up to bodies. So when they show up along this mountain pass, and that's when they discover baby Faith alive, he's just there with his wife, right? His wife's body and his 2 boys, right? And the other kids are gone. Well, but the kids had been picked up by other people coming up from the other side. Well, all of a sudden somebody ran up to him and told him that the Mackenzie was missing, that she was lost, that nobody knew where she was. And my mom said it was instant. It went from like the most guttural grief of a dad to, my gosh, I still have a daughter I need to save. Somewhere in these crazy mountains, I have to go find this daughter, you know? It just like switched mode. She said it was crazy, but he was the one that said, well, you can see the lights to Bavispe, but you can't see the lights of La Mora. So she probably went to Bavispe, and that's where they found her. She had thrown her shoe at a rattlesnake along the route. So she was one shoe on, one shoe off. And she was just walking down the road heading towards this town. And first thing she said, I'm telling you, freezing night. And she said, we just have to go back. We have to go back up there. We have to go find the other kids. My brothers and sisters are up there. And they told her, no, they're okay. We got them now, sweetheart. We got them, you know. And they were all right.
You know, it's for the listeners and viewers, this is not like a story that only addicts and those families that have history of addiction needs to pay attention to. There's an average kid at a high school in a locker room takes one pill for a headache and it has laced with fentanyl. This is a concern for me, for my kids who are in high school, my kids who are in junior high, my kids who are in college. This is a conversation that is so scary. Like you said before, you can make one mistake, you can experiment one time, and you can find yourself never waking up again.
But Vince, it's even beyond what you just said. You did a great job articulating that. Thank you. But here's what I would say to that. There's kids that get dropped off at like this Bronx daycare center. And there's kids that look like this young Dominican, beautiful baby. His mother dropped him off to go to daycare. He's not a drug addict. He was 1-year-old kid. And guess what? Mom got the call that the kid is dead. And guess what? The daycare worker, the drug trafficker, instead of calling 911 when 3 babies went down or 4 babies went down,
I read the story.
He called her husband to get the stash out of the facility, and then they called 911. It was too late. And by the way, I'm glad you brought that up because we're making collages now with all these very young kids that are dying. I have a friend that I work with in my work here with the Lost Voices of Fentanyl. This poor woman. She had a 3-year-old, okay? His name was Cash. I'm not going to go crazy with these pictures to your audience, but this is the mama at our rally last year, okay? This poor 3-year-old gets dropped off at her ex-husband's house for the weekend, right? The custody battles that everyone's dealing with. He gets up into the stash in one of the tenants' rooms, and his 3-year-old baby died from fentanyl ingestion. Now, here's the part of the story I want to tell you. What I was very touched by this beautiful story is that this woman was addicted her whole life. She smoked crack. She was homeless, living on the streets. She was trying to get her life back together. She got pregnant. And by the way, she admits saying like, look, I couldn't get off the addiction. It was powerful. But as soon as I knew my baby was coming, I stopped. I stopped using drugs. She said at the end, she says, I never thought that my addiction would end because of the birth of my child, but my child died because someone else's addiction.
Damn.
It was so sad. And now I have a picture. I'm not going to show it, but 3-month-old in his coffin. I'm sorry, 3-year-old in the coffin as mom is sitting there over the coffin. So it's not just drug addicts. It's not just, people with depression, anxiety. It's a whole, like, our future generation is dying. China's behind it. Did you see the Homeland Security? I'm sorry, the China House Select Committee's recent findings on this CCP's involvement? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. Please enlighten me.
Okay, so I participated with this group, and afterwards I was actually briefed up, and I saw the website. So the House China Select Committee did an investigation and has established clearly that the PRC, People's Republic of China government, under the control of the CCP, strategically and economically benefited from fentanyl crisis. They subsidize the manufacturing and exports of fentanyl analogs and precursor chemicals outside of China. They give tax rebates. They also have given grants and awards to companies that are trafficking these materials outside of China. They hold ownership at some of these companies that are tied to these drug trafficking groups. They're failing to prosecute fentanyl and precursor manufacturer exporters. They're allowing open sales over their CCP-controlled internet to sell these chemicals and drugs outside of China. So basically, the bottom line is they're helping destroy and kill our citizens. And America's sitting back and not even going after this aggressively from the White House.
Yeah, it's why wage a war when you can create a madness through drugs? You can destroy a country internally through just drugs.
Right. They're basically taking advantage of America's addiction to drugs. They're operating in a stealth operation under the disguise of drug addiction, and they're wiping out our future generation. And by the way, on that note, because you brought it up, I want you to know, my friend here, Vince, U.S. military's dying at record levels as well.
Oh yeah, I've personally have seen that happen.
Yeah, so they're depressed. They don't like what they're experiencing. Some of them, they're going to turn to these drugs. Look, the West Point cadets, 2 years ago, I got called late night to go on a national news show in the morning because 5 cadets went down from snorting what they thought was cocaine. It was actually fentanyl. And so thank God they all lived as far as I know. But Vince, one other thing that I want you to realize is that what's frustrating me, and you could see the intensity and how pissed off I am, because I work with the Army of Families. I hear the stories every day. I got a message the other day. The lady said, hey, Mr. Maltz, you remember when we were working together at the Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally, putting up the banners? Guess what? I just lost my second child to fentanyl poisoning this weekend. So this is the kind of stuff I get hit with. So it really bothers me that we're not even, like our CDC, for example, make it clear. If I was the president, fired immediately. They don't even put out timely and accurate statistics to the public. When COVID was going on every night, COVID cases, COVID deaths, we don't even know how many people have died from fentanyl. The numbers are rough estimates, but more importantly, we don't even know the hundreds of thousands that have been saved by Narcan because no one's tracking the fentanyl poisonings, the mass casualties that the EMS are saving on every one of these calls. It's 2 weeks ago in Austin, Texas, right? We had like 11 dead, 79 poisoned in Austin, Texas, the capital of Texas. And by the way, the EMS, they said it was like 1,000% increase in EMS calls. It's insane. We're not even tracking that.
Yeah, law enforcement officers currently almost in Texas everywhere have Narcan or a derivative of that, as well as EMS. It's become a thing where it's just your normal daily carry. That's crazy.
It's all been border security, and I'm still being an extension of my Border Patrol arm. But no, we had a case where a mother was crossing with her 2 kids and another portion of a group. And the son was, a big boy. He was I'm 6'1". He was close to my size, probably a little heavier, 15 years old. And he's already started to succumb to some heat exhaustion and just kind of losing his mind. And, just being kind of combative. And the smugglers tied his hands together so he couldn't, flail his arms around. And as time goes on, he's still being very obnoxious. So they tell the mom, tell you what, you're going to have to do something with your son. Get a rock, hit him in the back of the head. It won't kill him. It'll just knock him out.
No way.
And either you're going to do it or we're going to do it. So he started acting up again. So she hit him on the head a couple of times. It didn't kill him. But he was tied in the front. They were laid on top of him on the ground, and he died of asphyxiation. The sad part was his 9-year-old brother that was in the group too. Mom told him to lay on the legs, but it wasn't that she did it, out of malice. I really felt for her, man. I tell you what, and she's since been acquitted. I truly believe in that. She suffered enough, but it's either she did it her way or the cartel was going to do it. The smugglers. Just a horrible.
There's so many of those stories that, the heartless would say, well, then don't come across. But those who are in that moment, those who feel so compelled to risk everything to come to America, they don't think about that stuff. They want the chance to have opportunity, what we have, the gift that we've been born with, right? And I find it fascinating that a lot of Americans who live in this country who don't show their gratitude to that fact, they've forgotten how fortunate we are. Even if they're lower income, middle class, it doesn't matter. If you're an American citizen, you have an opportunity to do what you want with that. And millions and millions are willing to risk their lives daily. What that mother would do just to try and protect her son, she had to harm her own son. And inadvertently, he lost his life. Wow.
Yes, horrible tragedy. Even with that being said, I've had the opportunity to go to speak at various events, and I'd love, of course, I get invited by more of the conservative groups, more of the conservative media, but I'd love to have the opportunity because my story is not going to change. Meaning, I'm not going to build the story one way to
please one crowd. Yeah.
Group of people. I'm just going to tell the truth, man, and what it is. It's a solvable problem. It's going to take both sides, and really both sides have contributed to where we are. Yes, this administration and right now is doing absolutely nothing. And as I mentioned, the other administrations built up border security, but Republicans and Democrats are really together to blame in a lot of this. It's not just,
I've tried to explain to people that the answer is actually both sides of the party's argument, but somewhere in the middle of that. You have one side who
100%.
wants an open border. You have one side who wants a closed border because of Homeland Security, and it's more in the middle. If you do too much Homeland Security, well, then we're almost North Korea, right? We can't have too much lockdown because we lose freedom, right? And then the other side of it, if you have too much open door policy for immigration, well, then we don't even have a country at that point. So it's in the middle. We have to always have strong Homeland Security foundation because we the people deserve to be safe in our own country, right? And then the other side of it, we are a country of dignity and rooted off of immigration. And so we should allow legal immigration. And so we should look further into why is it so challenging and how can we almost streamline that process for those who really show up here with the gratitude of America and want to invest back into this great nation.
You had that criminal element from the transnational criminal organizations that were coming over, stealing cars, taking them into Mexico, retrofitting them to help smuggle narcotics into the U.S. When you didn't have any infrastructure out in the eastern desert along the Barium Goldwater Range, we were recovering stolen vehicles that had been stuck out there. They were burned to the ground by the cartels and the smugglers. And that's when we started to see an increase in that activity back then it was marijuana was a real big thing. And what was really a concern for us was the fact that the U.S. attorneys were not charging these individuals for smuggling narcotics. So Border Patrol agents were just, as a result, were only able to seize the narcotics and then turn them back. That's way back when they were dealing with this. They would just seize the narcotics and then send them back across the border, voluntary return, because the U.S. attorney wouldn't charge them. And that was back under Sheriff Ralph Ogden when I worked under him. So, and what we did is the sheriff, and I continue it to this day, we cross-deputized federal officers from Border Patrol so that if the U.S. attorney wouldn't charge these individuals for smuggling narcotics, then they could charge them through the state process, acting under the color and authority of the sheriff. This way, there was 100% consequence delivery. Each and every one of those individuals that were arrested received at least a minimum sentence of 2.5 years in prison. That word got out and it slowed down the narcotics smuggling in Yuma County. So that was the first thing that we did. We also had to find grant monies to actually buy gates to put up along the farm fields and the canals to prevent the cartels from stealing the farm tractors, because the insurance companies were basically letting our farmers know that we can't keep paying you for all these stolen tractors. We're going to have to drop you in your insurance. We couldn't have that happen, not in this community. So that's why we ended up paying for the fences and the gates, and then the Bureau of Reclamation installed them for us. So that's the kind of partnerships and working together. And we were dealing with I don't know if you've ever heard of a rape tree.
No.
Okay, so the smugglers of humans would basically along our river corridor, because there was so much non-indigenous plant life, you could conceal yourself easily in this brush along the river corridor. So you couldn't see them. And we were advised by some individuals that there was a rape tree, which we didn't know back then what that was either. So the smugglers would bring across a group after they paid into the U.S. down there along our river corridor. And when they did reach into the U.S., then the smugglers would actually rape the women and then would hang their clothing on this tree.
Oh my God.
And when we found out about that, we got with our Border Patrol partners and we went down there and we took that tree down. And the second thing was the Border Patrol was able to get funding so we could go down there and get rid of all that non-indigenous plant life that was down along the Colorado River, to cut all that ability for the criminal element to be raping these women and children down there on the border and then hanging their panties and bras on this tree. That was when we started experiencing a lot of the cartel stuff. So on that's on the Baja California side. We have this Sinaloa cartel on their southern part, south of San Luis. And we all know who that is, El Chapo Guzman and his sons that run that. So that's where the partnerships came into place. We've dealt with the rapes, the robberies, the homicides. We just had a homicide suspect in custody that was a smuggler that had a disagreement with the smuggler that he was bringing up. Ended up that guy went off a cliff, died. Working with Border Patrol, we were tracked down the suspect. He just got 10.5 years in prison for that. So unfortunately, when this stuff happens, the local law enforcement are the ones that are tasked with dealing with all these crimes that you see. It's not Border Patrol that deals with them. It's not ICE. It's not anybody else but the locals. So we started seeing an increase in deaths in the desert, and individuals were being left by the smugglers out in the desert because they told them, you only have a day or two. You don't need much water. And they would leave the groups abandoned out in the desert. So we have to deal with those deaths as well.
How many, there's a few things I want to touch on, but real quick on the same subject. How many?
It's all encompassing when you look at the.
Sorry, I think we have.
How many what?